Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. We are so excited to be here today to discuss our fascinating topic, why automation matters, ensuring compliance in the EOR framework. Thank you so much for joining today. We're so excited to discuss this topic to everyone across the globe. My colleague and I will be conducting today's seminar. I'm Gina Dorcelis. I'm Senior Director of Global Employment and U.S. Legal Counsel for Papaya Global, essentially ensuring and enabling businesses to hire globally and ensuring maximum compliance without legal landmines. And I also have the amazing Yael Jose. She's the Director of Product Management with Papaya Global, ensuring that we're driving scalable product innovation across 100 plus countries. Papaya Global Services in close to 180 countries, ensuring that you're hiring your workers globally and compliantly. Let's get into today's agenda. Essentially, global hiring creates incredible opportunities, but it also comes with real compliance risk. Over the next, half an hour, myself and Yael, we're going to discuss why compliance, how do you ensure compliance and why it matters, how risk escalates across borders, and EOR, what is the role of the employer of record? Why would you gauge into an EOR? Why it's important, why it is relevant, and why it's also not risk-free. And also, why does automation make the difference in today's world? And lastly, we'll give you some final takeaways. During today's webinar, you'll see a poll. Please feel free to answer it as it pops up. I'll start by framing the compliance risk and challenges, and then last but not least, I'll hand it over to Yael to discuss the automation and how that helps companies manage this complexity at a larger scale. Now let's get started and begin with the stakes. Navigating global regulations is particularly challenging. Every country brings its own payroll laws, tax obligations, labor regulations that are constantly changing. When companies get it wrong, the costs are substantial to the company. For example, you have issues such as misclassification, unpaid taxes, wrongful terminations. All these aspects lead to specific and potential lawsuits towards the company. So, what exactly is an employer of record, also known as an EOR? An employer of record allows your company to hire employees in locations where you do not have an entity. How do we break that down? For example, let's say if you are a US based company headquartered in Delaware and you want to hire workers in the Netherlands, you would need to engage an EOR. What is the function of an EOR? Why would you choose an EOR? An EOR can simplify certain aspects of onboarding global workers. For example, handle payrolls and taxes, ensures compliance in the contracts, while you as the end client handles the day-to-day activities of the worker. Now, what would make a client hire an EOR or engage with an EOR as opposed to establishing an entity themselves? It's very beneficial for companies to expand to new international markets. For example, you have a 6-month project in France and you don't want to have a permanent establishment in that country. You may engage with an EOR. However, just because you engage in EOR, there's still risk and potential liabilities for the end client. They don't simply disappear by using an EOR. And stay tuned for some of those risks. Now, let's talk about why workforce flexibility is no longer an optional. It's a competitive advantage. Particularly post pandemic, long gone are the days when your supervisor is in the same jurisdiction as you. We live in a new world where the majority of workers are remote. Sometimes the business has a need for foreign talent, international borders. So we live in a world where borders no longer define talent. The remote work has access, unlocked access to global skills, and there's an expectation of limitless borders in today's world. Not to mention the rise of freelance and gig workers in today's economy. 1.57 billion people in this world are freelancers, with gig economy workers rising at 17%, and this number is intended to triple by 2034. Nearly half of today's global workforce around the world are freelance and gig workers. And lastly, but not least, we're also seeing a record high demand for contingent workers, especially in the tech, finance, and operational space. Companies need to scale with agility. In sum, what this means for your company is that flexible workforce is critical to your company's success. It's inevitable. You have to be able to handle not just direct employees, freelance workers, gig workers, contingent workers, hourly employees, or else the business may fail. It will provide your company with resilience, reach, and speed, and it's inevitably critical to your company's success. Now, to break it down, how do companies achieve a competitive advantage? You have to follow a workforce strategy. First, you must determine the proper framework to meet the business needs. Do you need payroll workers? Do you need EOR workers? Do you need agency independent contractor workers? And what this means is there must be a flexibility first approach due to the rise of gig and contingent workers. Not to mention, compliance, above all, is a necessary ingredient. There can be no cutting of corners. And not to mention, and this is what Yale will delve into, that there must be adaptive system. As the tech evolves, so will your workforce demands. Now, we got into what an EOR is, how the workforce needs to be flexible, but why would you gauge an EOR? Let's get to the root of that. Why would you gauge into an EOR? The cost of establishing entities aren't particularly high. For example, like the previous example that I mentioned, if you're a US based company and you want to hire workers in Netherlands, that cost can be particularly high. That process can be daunting. Registering, the incorporating the business, ensuring that workers are paid smoothly, and the fines that you have to pay to the particular jurisdiction, and not to mention the penalties that you can obtain for getting it wrong. So that's the main reason why, particularly our clients engage EORs. The cost of establishing entities are particularly high. And also in this day and age of gig workers and freelancers, you don't want to incur a high cost to the business for one worker in the Netherlands or one worker in Delaware. Also for compliance, to ease the burden of regulatory compliance. Regulatory compliance is particularly challenging. For example, when you have workers around the globe, you have to comply with the termination regulations. In different particular countries, there's notice provisions that must be applied. For example, in the case of the US, where there's at will, you have to be familiar with all the regulations in 50 different states, and not to mention with complying with the terms of the contract. Also, severance. In particular countries, severance is allocated to particular workers. If you're not familiar, if you're a US based company, you're not particular to the different requirements in the UK and Europe and in APAC as to providing severance to particular countries. Also, PIP plans. You have to ensure that your performance improvement plan complies with a particular regulation. Certain countries require you to issue warning letters. It can take anywhere from 4 weeks, 60 to 90 days to comply with PIP plans. You have to ensure compliance with all local regulations. And with an EOR, you can outsource that. Could you only imagine the daunting task that is for a particular country that is not headquartered or does not have an entity in the country where the worker is residing? And not to mention enhanced capabilities, HR, and better workforce planning for the workers. You have to ensure that all the EOR has all the capabilities, the infrastructure that your particular country may not have, your particular corporation may not have. Not to mention employee expectations. And I think that this gets lost, why people should get engaged with an EOR or why companies should get engaged with an EOR. Number one, workers have a certain expectations from being a part of a particular jurisdiction. They expect to be paid on time as the rest of their colleagues. They anticipate to have the same local benefits that other individuals in the states where they are working get paid, and not to mention certain cultural nuances that the local EOR may understand that your company does not. For example, in Europe, most of the workers prefer permanent contracts with strong benefits. So if you offer that particular worker a fixed term contract, it may not be advisable. In China, candidates view benefits such as a housing fund, social insurance, and severance protections as the standard. In Latin America, there's the expectation that the workers will receive 13 months salary. These are all foreign concepts to, non-local workers. So therefore you need EORs on the ground to understand these benefits. These are cultural nuances that the workers expect and how they expect to be hired and treated. So that is essentially some of the reasons as to why companies engage with EORs. However, if your processes are manual, the end client is still exposed. An EOR is just one element of the system. It's not the entire system itself. When compliance breaks down, there's a missed chain reaction. For example, one hot topic that's been in the news lately are the misclassification of workers. Misclassification of workers, essentially, there are many times when companies, to skirt around local laws, will classify and categorize workers as independent contractors as opposed to employees. However, that is a huge legal risk. For example, when courts determines workers are misclassified, the company may be liable for significant fines, penalties, back pay, and not to mention the reputational risk. I think the reputational risk is the often overlooked element because it's something that, well, you can pay the fines, you can pay the penalties, you can pay the back pay, but that reputation will not leave your company. Just a case study or a case in point, in 2023, the Department of Labor ordered Uber to pay close to $1 million in back wages and damages for nearly to 5,000 drivers for illegally misclassifying workers as independent contractors in violation of federal wage laws. That's just one example of the risk that is involved with misclassifying workers. And this is something that I deal with on a daily basis where, clients want to classify workers as independent contractors, but however, they still have control over those workers when they should appropriately be classified as employees. In addition to the misclassification, there can be so many missteps. For example, data privacy laws and GDPR compliance, transfer of sensitive employee information. I'm sure everyone here today has heard of the many data breaches that happen in companies when there's not strict compliance with data privacy laws and GDPR compliance. GDPR doesn't just extend to Europe. There are many countries that have relevant GDPR rules that need to be compliant. Your EOR needs to have a streamlined way to transfer sensitive employee information. Wrongful termination. This is something that I deal with on a daily basis. Workers bring claims for unjust and invalid terminations. So you must be familiar with the different countries' regulations. You can deal with certain countries such as in France, where there's strong employee protection, strong misconduct or performance can be the only valid grounds to terminate workers. Examples such as the Netherlands, where you must go to the labor court to seek permission for unilateral termination. And not to mention in the US, although there's a misconception with the US that because that there isn't an at-will doctrine and you can terminate workers, but there's so many caveats, not to mention the different regulations, as it's essentially 50 mini countries. And also certain regulations such as in APAC, which are very strong employee-friendly regions. Not to mention poor EOR execution. You must ensure that you withhold taxes correctly, pay workers on time, not registering the appropriate documents. Any action leads to a chain reaction of missteps. Now that we understand the risks, we have to navigate them in real life. For that, I'm going to turn to Yael, who's going to discuss the execution side of this conversation. How do automation and systems translate into real world compliance?
Thank you, Gina. So let's talk about why automation matters for compliance, as you said. This is true that manual system and workflow just can't scale. They will break very quickly. It's fine if you're working small, if you have few employees in few countries and you need to know very a little information from those countries. But what happens if you want to start scaling, if you want to start hiring in more countries, 5, 10, even 50 countries? All of a sudden you need to be familiar with so many laws, so many regulations, difference in each country. You need to be familiar with the tax rate and the benefit structure and currencies and languages and deadlines and so on, which makes it very difficult to scale up. That's where automation becomes essential. Automation allows you to scale up globally as needed in order to be familiar and compliant in all those countries. There are three main advantages to the automation. The first one is accuracy. As long as you will have all the compliance up to date in real time, getting all the changes in real time in your process, in your systems, make sure that it's applied in every step of the process, ensuring that all the calculations are taken into consideration, all the latest updates, that will give you the accuracy. Second is the visibility. You want to be able to see throughout all the process, all the information that you need. You need to see it in every country, in every step of the process. That will also allow you to have a visibility into mistakes, errors as soon as possible in the process. So it gives you the option to solve small problems before they become big problems. The last advantage is the speed. You want the process to be fast, efficient, smooth as possible. You don't want your team to continue and doing the repetitive work that they are doing cycle after cycle, which can also cause to a lot of manual errors due to manual works. And all of that, only then you will have the foundation of scaling up globally with the compliance and safety and confidence that you are reducing the risk of doing so. Next slide, please. Thank you. So when expanding globally, companies usually face multi-compliance risk, whether it is misclassification of workers, miscalculation of payroll, missing benefits, violating labor laws or tax regulation, and so many more risks. All of this can lead, as Gina talked about before, to fines, penalties, lawsuits, and even reputational damage. All of this blocks you from having a global operation as you wish. But when you have the EOR backed up with automation and you are no longer relying on human and someone from your team to know all the regulation, to be familiar with every regulatory changes that there is, to have the changes up to date in time and updated into every step of the process. With automation, it's different. The system itself is updated in real time with all the latest regulation. It incorporates those changes, those regulation, those compliance issues into the process, making sure that the calculation is accurate. It also gives you information and updates if there is something out of place, if there can be issues, mistakes, or even just flag that there might be something that you need to see and understand and handle them ahead of time before you're having a bigger issues. So all of that, the automation helps to also reduce the manual errors that are done by doing manual work and also save time for your team from doing the repetitive work. So the EOR provides the expertise and the automation brings the execution. And only by combining those two together, you will have a predictable risk mitigation system. Next slide, please. Thank you. So let's talk about what do you need to consider when you're upgrading your workforce system. When I'm talking to clients, I keep hearing the same frustration over and over again. Contracts are stuck in PDF, payrolls runs from spreadsheet, compliance reminders are lost in email inboxes. All of this create a hidden risk. The automation fix that by centralizing everything, making sure that you have a unified process in place that integrates all your system into one single workflow. Your HR system, your payroll system, legal, payment system, everything should be combined into a single process where you make sure that the data is passed throughout this system, unified and up to date, make sure that nothing is lost. The integration actually keeps everything aligned and stable. The next thing that you need to consider is the global coverage. If you want to scale up globally, you need to make sure that the platform can handle multiple country operation, multi-currency, everything as native in the system itself. You need to make sure that it's not pieced together or require additional manual workarounds. It has to be part of the system to make sure that everything will always be up to date and accurate. Not just that, but you also have to make sure that the system support money movement at scale across the different location of the world with the different currencies and so on. And all of this with a secure and compliant way. The last, but not the least one, is the data visibility. you have to make sure that you have transparency in real-time data into everything that happens in your organization across all the locations that you keep higher. You want to be able to know everything, to have it aggregated. Only then you will be able to make sure that you see everything and you will be able to make fast and good decisions in your organization. Those four elements are not features. Those are building blocks that will allow you to have workforce system that will give you the ability to grow globally without introducing risk or even managing your risk of doing so. And with that, I want to hand over to Gina to wrap up. Gina, you are
Thank you.
muted.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that was very, very insightful. And I'm sure that everyone found that extremely helpful when it comes to automation. I know that I did. Um, Basically, in a nutshell, your final takeaways from today. I know that was a lot of information that we threw at you. Compliance is a business priority. There's no sugarcoating compliance. You must maintain 100% compliance no matter what. Compliance with local regulations is absolutely essential. You must budget for risk mitigation. Non compliance is significantly more costly. Don't assume that your EOR eliminates everything, as we had discussed. You must review the agreements. You must ensure that your contracts are localized. You must determine who holds the liability and understand the particular local nuances. This is absolutely vital when it comes to managing an EOR, and not all EORs are equal. Sometimes the end clients think that because they engage with the EOR, that's where the liability ends. Who's responsible for the legal fees if there is a dispute with the worker? Who's retaining their local counsel? Is it the EOR's counsel? Is it the end client's counsels? Absolutely do not assume that your EOR eliminates all risk. You must automate, 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 automate. I cannot say that enough. You have to invest in tools that flag misclassification, provide lawful updates to you. I myself, I get law alerts on the top 5 global regulations around the world just to keep my teams up to date with the law. Those are just passive ways that you can ensure that you're in compliance and ensure automation. Unify your absolute payroll data. Ensure that there's centralized solutions for payroll. Automation in today's world and in the invention of AI, there's no excuse for it. And also, as I had touched on in the beginning, flexibility is critical to your company's success. You have to mix models. You cannot have a one size approach for all your workers. You have to have a flexible workforce where you engage EORs, where you have contractors, where you have direct hires, navigations for gig and tech workers. And I would say you have to revisit these systems quarterly. You can't just have one size approach. You have to continue to invest in these strategies for your company's success. It's absolutely critical in the post pandemic world. Before we close, I want to leave you with this question. What's one compliance blind spot in your global hiring strategy today? And what's your plan to fix it this quarter? And with that, that concludes today's presentation. We really wanted to thank you for spending time with us today to discuss this very important topic. Feel free to connect with us and ask us any questions. We're available on LinkedIn. Our QR codes are on the PowerPoint. Or last but not least, check out all the new updates on the Papaya Global website. Thank you so much for your time today.